Welcome back to China. The 2025 Chinese Grand Prix is over. The paddock is being rather noisily packed up behind us, but we are here one last time, Ronald, to chat about what went down. A victory for McLaren's Oscar Piastri, his first of the season, obviously just the second race. McLaren's 50th 1-2 in F1 history, with Lando Norris coming second. There were storylines, however, all through the day, as we'll come to. Lando Norris reckoning he might have had a chance of winning the race were it not for the fact he suffered a big brake problem late on. He sort of played it down, but it was what Andrea Stella was not saying that I thought was particularly interesting. Then there was the fact that at Ferrari, there were team orders between Lewis Hamilton and Charles Leclerc, but ultimately both of those cars disqualified for technical issues post-race. And then at Red Bull, terrible pace for Max Verstappen. He finished fourth on the road, but it's what's happening to the other car and the future of Liam Lawson, even at this very early stage of the 2025 season, under big pressure. We'll come to that as well. And finally, you got an excellent story first thing in the morning about the potential rapid return of V10 engines to Formula One. But yeah, let's start with McLaren's 1-2. Ronald, what did you make of Oscar Piastri and Lando Norris today?
I think it's what we expected coming from Melbourne, but maybe not what we expected when we saw how it unfolded here with Ferrari being so dominant in the sprint. So basically stuff got back to normal again. I think it's good for Piastri to bounce back after the bad luck he had or the mistake he made in Melbourne. I have to say, the rest of it I'll leave to you, because my day, as you said, was completely dominated by two topics: Red Bull drivers and V10s potentially coming back. Well, we'll talk about that in a second.
Once again, second race in a row, it all really boiled down to McLaren. Obviously in Australia, the rain meant Max Verstappen got much more into the picture, but here it was a two-horse race pretty much from the off. George Russell finishing third, an excellent weekend for the Mercedes driver, but he was just at arm's length once the start had been negotiated. He had a good look down. Oscar Piastri's inside the start. Lando Norris able to power around the outside. The fact that the two McLarens couldn't double stack at the first round of pit stops, the only round of pit stops, meant that Russell was briefly able to get back ahead, but Norris ultimately just too strong and came back on him. And yeah, the race, we were expecting it to be a two-stopper. In actual fact, it was a one-stopper. Critical difference there. I spoke to Mario Isola, Pirelli's Motorsport boss. He said, well, basically the teams changed their cars, anti-roll bar adjustments, changing the aero balance as well to make sure that everything was shifted that bit more rearward. So they were having less understeer, less graining. The use of the hard tyres, which no one had seen at that point in the weekend when they were fitted at the pit stops in this race, it all added up with the track rubbering in, just to mean it meant it was a one-stop race. Oscar Piastri called it his most complete F1 weekend ever. And I have to say, I think I agree with that, considering we got GP pole position. I thought he was superb. Lando Norris, interesting, much stronger driver for McLaren here last year, but the big difference is all to do with the track surface. Then you had that weird paint coating. It was soaked in the bitumen. It was very sticky. Basically, it meant that there was no graining. So despite the fact that the layout hasn't changed, it's the way the tyres interact with the track surface. The long corners here, it just induces understeer. Norris hated it. It was tearing the tyres. Piastri in his driving style, which is much smoother, much less stress on the tyres, able to cope with that. The two McLaren drivers, they're really hamming up this point. They're pushing each other to be better, and the way they were really better this weekend was they were able to learn from each other. Lando Norris adjusting his driving style and was much quicker in the race. Also much happier with those hard tyres, as I mentioned. The brake issue did strike in the closing stages. Andrea Stella explaining that it was due to a leak in one of the components on Norris's car. He says it's not to do with the brake line, so he's sort of going into details, but not going into details. But yeah, it was just getting bigger and bigger, an issue that McLaren had seen from quite early on in the race. But nevertheless, I think Norris still leaves pretty satisfied, considering he was fairly awful. You know, that's a subjective term there, but he was weak compared with Oscar Piastri at the start of the weekend. He leaves with an 8-point championship lead, up from 7 in Australia, and he had it cut in the sprint race. But yeah, that was at the front of the field. George Russell third, as I said, Max Verstappen fourth. Then the Ferrari drivers were supposed to be there, but they were disqualified. Charles Leclerc's car found to be 1 kilogram underweight. It's not about the front wing that he damaged. It was just the fact that they've got that wrong. They replaced the part with actually a slightly heavier spare front wing, and the car was still found to be underweight. Pierre Gasly's car also found to be underweight. He's been disqualified. And Lewis Hamilton, his rear skids worn too much. He's also been disqualified. So, poor for Ferrari, but particularly poor, Ronald, considering Leclerc, Lewis Hamilton also disqualified from the same race, Austin in 2023, where he was racing for Mercedes, but Leclerc's Ferrari's gone. But what we're thinking is that this is an even bigger error this time around, and why is that?
Yeah, I told the FIA I find this one worse. I find this one more stupid from Ferrari, because the sprint format, as we all know, has changed. We've got 2 times park firmware now, which means you can still look at the data from the sprint, look at the plank wear, look at what you need to do in terms of setup, but especially ride height. And then to get it wrong for the main race, that's a mistake that shouldn't happen really. It's even one of the main things why we got up with 2 times spark permit, because they always referred back to Austin, like, yeah, we shouldn't have this again, so we should give the teams another chance to get it right. They got the chance, they didn't take it, so yeah, I feel like it's really a poor mistake, also a really, really painful one for the constructors already. So Ferrari put out a statement to say we will learn from it. I would say they should have learned already, but yeah.
100%. Well, yeah, that's the sort of immediate post-race news, but it was something that actually you were across before the race had even started. It's become particularly interesting, and that is the future of Liam Lawson, as I said at the start of the video. There's the potential, Ronald, that he might actually be out of the Red Bull before the next race in Japan, where all this freight is being packed up and shipped to for the race there in 2 weeks' time. So, what's going on?
Well, first I have to credit my Spanish colleagues and also Oleg Karpov, who wrote the story in the end. But yeah, let's be very clear, no decision taken yet. Not even sure what the outcome will be. Just the story is Red Bull is considering the lineup and considering if they need to do a swap between Lawson and Tsunoda as early as Japan. I have to say I feel for Liam, because you know he's into Red Bull racing, his big chance, his big dream, and then 2 races and you get this. But basically we have to make a clear division between performance and I feel like the more personal elements. If you look at the numbers, the data, it's what Christian Horner mentioned in his media session. He said we will go through the data, we will look at it next week. He didn't feel that like Liam getting to tracks he's never been before is a factor. You could argue like Japan will be important because he knows the track, but he said, yeah, those guys get up to speed so easily, so quickly, it shouldn't play a role. So based on the numbers, you could maybe argue for a swap, but then you've got the personal aspects. And then you can say, okay, is it fair to do it already now? And the second thing, there's a PR risk also for Yuki Tsunoda, because if you put him in the Red Bull car in Suzuka, and if he will be like P20 dead last like Liam Lawson was, it's in front of his home fans. So I think there's a big risk. And I stick to my earlier opinion. Personally, I think it doesn't matter at all who you put in the second Red Bull seat. If you talk to sources within the team, they all say, yeah, Max needs such a strong end. The more we try to help him, and of course they do because he's delivering, the more difficult it gets for the second driver. So yeah, basically whoever is in second seat will struggle massively, which happened to Albon, to Gasly, to Checo Perez, now to Liam. And I feel if they put Yuki in, at what point this season, he will struggle as well. So to be really honest, I feel for Liam. Thankfully, it's not my call and they will go through all the data next week. Also, Max Verstappen will visit the factory, go through all the data on his side to see if they can come up with solutions for the RB21. So it's going to be an interesting 2 weeks at least for Red Bull.
Absolutely. I'm of the opinion they should put Max Verstappen in the RB. Exactly. It'd be easier for him to drive, he'd probably enjoy it a bit more, and that would just be a fascinating test of his supreme talent.
I thought Holder, so I thought Christian did and he was smiling about it, so yeah.
Well, yeah. Obviously wants to keep his own sponsors happy there, I'm sure. Yeah. But Ronald, yeah, we did want to talk about the big story at the very start of the day. You sat down with the FIA's Director of Single Seaters, Nicholas Tombiosis, and talked about the big topics, flexi wings, but particularly the return, potentially, of V10 engine power to Formula 1. What is the latest?
Yeah, the main element of that is that the FIA is really looking into it. So all the stories popping up, they are real. The FIA is looking into the option of bringing V10s with sustainable fuel back in 2028 or more likely 2029. But Tombazis explained there are 2 questions. The first one is, what kind of engine formula do we want long term? Is that a V10? If the answer is yes, then the second question is, what do we do for the years in between? And then it gets really interesting because he came up with like 2 scenarios. The first one is go ahead with the 2026 regulations, but shorten the cycle. The second one is completely ditch the 2026 rules and keep the current cars. I think that's a really long shot because if you look at the amount of money that teams, but especially PU manufacturers, already invested in the 2026 power units, that's massive. So they've got a massive call to make. But above all, I can say this is a huge political battleground now in Formula 1 because, you know, Mohammed Ben Sulayem is pushing for the V10s. I think F1, Stefano Domenicali mentioned it, are keen on it. Teams like Red Bull are maybe not fully against it, but then you've got Audi and Honda who are fully committed to like 26 and the sustainability goals. So I feel we will talk about this a lot in the upcoming weeks and months, and it's like the big F1 political battleground at the moment.
Absolutely. Well, Audi doesn't have an engine that it could suddenly turn to at short notice. I think F1 actually want a bit of credit for this whole V10 ideas. That's in the background. But anyway, you should be doing that discussion without me. I am leaving Autosport. This is my final video, my final podcast. I'm very sad about it, but also very excited at the same time. I just wanted to say thank you to everybody at Autosport. Thank you so much, Ronald. It's been fantastic. No, if anything, I've been a hindrance. But I did also want to say particular thankful to our wonderful video and podcast producers, Jason, Ben, Dre, Matt, and Charlotte. Thank you to you, the viewers, the readers, and everyone in Formula One.
I'm off to Prague.